okay? But I broke down with a big smile on my face. A free man, free at last.
What's the first thing you did as a free man?
I almost cried. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry that I committed a crime. I'm sorry that someone was murdered.
Did you feel remorse for what you did?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I had to feel remorse.
Joe Ligon's life changed forever when he joined a group of troubled teens on a robbery spree that left 2 people lifeless and 6 others knifed, and then spent the next 68 years in prison. Today, we'll dive into his story. Joe the Troubled Teen. Joe Ligon's fate took a dark turn when he was just 15 years old. Along with a group of other teenagers, Ligon joined a pack of drunk and reckless individuals on a robbery and attack spree that would forever change his life. The group, known as the Headhunters, downed several bottles of wine before attacking their victims with switchblades in a string of robberies and attacks in South Philadelphia. The rampage left 2 people lifeless and 6 others knifed. In 1953, Ligon and his co-conspirators were tried together, and despite pleading guilty, they were all convicted of 2 counts of first-degree slaying and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of ever getting out. At the time, police described the teenagers as part of a newly formed gang, and prosecutors named Ligon as responsible for both slayings. Although Ligon admitted taking part in the crime spree, he maintained that he did not slay anyone. He did admit to knifing another person who survived the attack. Ligon claims he was guilty of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that it was not his intention to hurt anyone.
It wasn't with the intention of hurting nobody. I didn't murder anybody.
What were you guilty of?
I was guilty with being at the wrong place at the wrong time.
He insists that he was just trying to fit in with the group of troubled teenagers who he fell in with after struggling with school.
What it shows is a group of kids. Joe did not know the kids particularly well. They were from a different school. And well, I'm not going to tell you what he shared with me over the years, but I will tell you what I read from the trial transcript from 1953. He still had it in his possession. Came down to Center City, Philadelphia, not necessarily from his neighborhood. He knew only some of them by nicknames. But the group of kids, 5 or so in number, pooled their nickels and dimes together, bought a bottle of wine, drank it, got drunk, had no more money, wanted more wine. Joe admitted at the time that he'd stabbed some people, as one of them had testified against him at the hearing, had several knives, and a group of kids went through the city and stabbed about 8 people, 2 people of which died.
Ligon's story is one of tragedy and remorse. Illiterate and poor, Ligon pled guilty to 2 counts of first-degree slaying, though he long claimed he didn't take part in the slayings. He received a life sentence in 1953. He spent 68 years of his life in prison, reflecting on his past mistakes and trying to make amends for his crimes. He concedes that he did knife someone that night, but maintains that he did not slay anyone. Despite this, he has expressed deep regret for his actions and the pain that he caused. During a recent interview, Ligon expressed his regret about his involvement in the crime, stating that he was sorry for committing the offense and apologized for the slaying that occurred as a result.
I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry that I committed a crime. I'm sorry that someone was murdered.
Did you feel remorse for what you did?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. I had to feel remorse.
You're free outright.
Outright. Thank you, Jesus. There's nothing I can do about the past, but the only thing I can say, I just hope I have a better future.
When questioned if he felt remorseful for his actions, he confirmed that he did feel remorse and acknowledged that it was necessary to do so. Ligon's case has been a subject of controversy, with many people arguing that he was convicted largely by guilt by association. His lawyer, Bradley Bridge, has stated that if the case went forward to trial today, Ligon would probably be found guilty of a manslaughter charge and maybe third-degree slaying.
In 1953 in June, that person obviously did not die. Joe was responsible for what he had done, but nothing more, but was found guilty of a mandatory life without parole sentence because he was found guilty of 2 murders. But he's not responsible for what the other people had done. So in actuality, he's guilty of an assault and robbery.
He also stated that Ligon might do 5 to 10 years or 10 to 20. Despite the controversy surrounding his case, Ligon has accepted his fate and tried to use his time in prison to better himself. He has become a mentor to other inmates, teaching them how to read and write and encouraging them to turn their lives around. He has also become a devout Christian and has found solace in his faith. While his actions as a teenager cannot be excused, Ligon's journey since then shows that it is possible to turn one's life around, even in the darkest of circumstances. As he nears the end of his life, Ligon remains committed to making amends for his past mistakes and inspiring others to do the same. Fate takes a turn. Joe Ligon, the oldest juvenile lifer in the U.S., was finally released from prison at the age of 83, almost 7 decades after he began his sentence. Ligon was just 15 years old when he was sentenced to life in prison for his involvement in a slaying case in 1953. However, after a series of court rulings, his sentence was reduced to 35 years to life in 2017. Although Ligon was immediately eligible for parole, he refused to apply, stating that being on parole was not freedom for him.
Joe Ligon was convicted of 2 murders in 1953. He was found guilty and given a mandatory life without parole sentence. We went before a judge in 2017, and the judge changed his sentence from a mandatory life without parole. That sentence was ultimately ruled unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court in 2016. He chose not to seek parole because it was his vision that he had served long enough. At that point, he was like 65 years in prison, to a sentence of 35 years to life. 35 years means he'd be eligible for parole immediately. And he refused to seek parole, as he had refused to seek clemency back in the 70s by challenging the mandatory parole term that the judge placed on him at sentencing. Ultimately, I vindicated what it was that he wanted, which was to get out without being on parole.
He wanted to be completely free without any limitations. Bradley Bridge, an assistant defender at the Defender Association of Philadelphia, has represented Ligon for more than 15 years. He told a reporter that he sensed injustice and was compelled to do something about it. Bridge, Ligon's lawyer since 2006, fought for 3 years to get him released due to time served, and in November 2020, a major victory was won in federal court. The mandatory maximum life sentence in Ligon's case was ruled unconstitutional, and U.S. District Judge Anita B. Brody ordered that he be resentenced or released within 90 days. Ligon's case is a representation of many issues in the criminal justice system, according to Bridge.
And what it was that they did. So a mandatory sentence, first of all, it symbolizes that we really should sentence people individually based on who they are. Doesn't do that. And the second thing is that children are particularly unique.
He argued that people should be sentenced individually based on who they are and what they did, and that mandatory sentences do not take into account the unique circumstances of each case. Bridge emphasized that children are capable of growth, change, and reform, and therefore, giving an adult sentence to a child is inherently wrong.
What it says about the criminal justice system is that we over-incarcerate people. We keep them in prison for far, far too long. But they shouldn't overpay for what it was that they did. The people that are found guilty of crimes need to pay a penalty for what it was that they did. That does 2 things that are harmful. First, it costs extra money for society. It has no chance and will have no opportunity to recidivate. He's not going to commit any more crimes, and it wastes lives. Joe Ligon is getting out now. He's 83 years old.
According to estimates by the Vera Institute of Justice, the state of Pennsylvania spent almost $3 million to incarcerate Ligon for 68 years, without even considering medical costs. It is a staggering amount that could have been used to address other issues in the criminal justice system. Ligon's fate started to change after a series of U.S. Supreme Court decisions found that mandatory life without parole sentences for juveniles were unconstitutional. The court ruled in 2016 that all juvenile lifers should have a chance to be resentenced. Ligon's sentence was reduced to 35 years to life in 2017, but unlike his fellow inmates who rushed to seek parole, Ligon refused to be released on parole because he did not want to be monitored for the rest of his life. Joe Ligon's release from prison is a reminder that there is a need for reform in the criminal justice system. The case highlights the importance of individualized sentences and the need to take into account the unique circumstances of each case. It also emphasizes the importance of recognizing the potential for growth and reform in children and treating them accordingly. A whole new world. Joe Ligon's story is one of tragedy and perseverance. For nearly 7 decades, he was incarcerated for crimes he committed at the age of 15, making him the oldest and longest-serving juvenile lifer in the country. When he was released from prison at the age of 83, the first thing he did as a free man was to almost cry with a big smile on his face.
Okay, but I broke down with a big smile on my face. A free man, free at last.
What's the first thing you did as a free man?
I almost cried.
Ligon, the son of Alabama sharecroppers, was incarcerated when Dwight D. Eisenhower was president and Nat King Cole's Pretend was on the music charts. he returns to a changed world, pointing out buses and buildings he had never seen before. After 68 years behind bars, Ligon walked out of a Pennsylvania prison a free man, only to see a Philadelphia transformed while he was behind bars. As he traveled to the public defender's city center office, Ligon was struck by the size of the massive buildings that had been erected in the years since he was incarcerated. He expressed that he was amazed by the towering buildings surrounding him, stating that they were unfamiliar and did not exist before.
I looked at it when I seen all these high buildings, but I expect to see that. They locked me up. They did. Yeah, those buses there, they didn't exist when I was, because they had the streetcar
lines, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't lock my mind up. It was the city hall.
When you were tried?
Yeah, that's what they told me.
Ligon's release was made possible by the Supreme Court's decision in 2012 that mandatory life sentences without the possibility of parole for juvenile offenders were unconstitutional. After 68 years of incarceration, he was finally a free man, ready to start a new chapter in his life in this whole new world. Future plans. Joe Ligon's release from prison was a historic moment for him and the criminal justice system in the U.S. Throughout his long years in prison, Ligon had a supportive family, including his niece, Valerie. However, most of his immediate family has since passed away. Ligon is not dwelling on the past and is instead focusing on his future. He is planning to use the custodial skills he learned in prison to get a job cleaning the offices of the lawyers who helped get him out. Despite spending most of his life behind bars, Ligon learned to read and write and even trained as a boxer. Now, various community agencies have come together to find Ligon a place to live upon his release. With the help of the Philadelphia Corporation of Aging, Ligon plans to stay in domiciliary care, which is described as a foster care-like arrangement with another family in the Philadelphia area. Other former juvenile lifers, including John Pace, who now works as a reentry coordinator for the Youth Sentencing and Reentry Project, plan to help Ligon acclimate to his new world. Ligon is optimistic about his future and is grateful for the support he has received from his family and the community. Ligon expressed that he cannot change what has already happened in the past, but he remains hopeful about his future. Ligon's release is a reminder that even after years of incarceration, there is hope for rehabilitation and reintegration into society. That's all for today, folks. See you next time.